Me, I got baptized when I was right around the time I turned 18, I think it was.
A lot of people ask me questions about how that shunning stuff worked, and I think people were amazed how they want you to feel ashamed and they wanted you to eat separately when you do get shunned from something they think is very, very bad. Did you go through that process at all, where it was something where you couldn't eat with a family? Did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was, so I was dating this girl before I got baptized, and she was, I think, 2 years older than me or something. And she dumped me soon after I got baptized. And it was at that time, I think, that I started realizing that one of the big reasons I got baptized was, well, everybody else did it. And he was a member of the church, and so it was just a thing to do. So I went along with it. But once I lost her support, then it was kind of anything went after that. I started a pretty fast slide towards the fence at that point. And so, yeah, I got baptized, and honestly, I would say when I went to start the what do they call it, instruction classes. When I started with that, I think I really believe there was a part of me that really wanted. I thought that was the way to God's heart right there, and I wanted that. But by the time I actually got wet, then I didn't really, at that point, that wasn't really the focus anymore because of the way they do it. I had to grow out a beard, and I got criticized for that, first of all, because I couldn't grow much of a beard. And second of all, scruffy little I had, I trimmed it up a little bit every now and then. I got caught, and they didn't like that. And then they delayed the actual baptism service, I think two times, so a total of a month.
Wow.
And the one time was because I showed up to church in my horse, the harness on my horse. I had replaced all the old brass hardware with stainless steel hardware, like the buckles and snaps and everything. And anybody else, and I didn't even realize I wasn't supposed to. I didn't even know. I just wanted to make the harness look really nice. And so that was a no-go. I had to switch all that back to the brass, the old green brass and everything else. So I did that. And then the other time, I know one of them was a haircut. I want to say, I think it was my haircut. The hair over the ears wasn't long enough. And then Elvin, one of the other kids that was going to get baptized, his hat was bent up a little too far on the side. And so they decided that was a no-go, so they canceled it again. By the time it was all over and we actually got baptized, I was so sick and tired of it at that point already. There was no way. I didn't have a chance of making it as a member in the Amish community at that point because I was so fed up. It didn't take that much until I was fed up with it. So, which explains why we went after the baptism service. After church, we went home. Some of my cousins had come over to our church. And we went home to my house, and we got out the battery-powered trimmer and buzzed off the beard and trimmed my hair up. And we went to one of the local gas stations would sell us beer because they knew us. And you probably know him. It was Russell up in. I don't want to get him in trouble. You probably know who he was.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
But we had some beer that afternoon. We didn't get drunk or nothing, but we had a good time. It was such a relief to have that over with. It was just, yeah.
But you got baptized like everybody else. It's just something you do. It's not something when your heart's ready. It's not for the right reasons. It was for all that's just what we do. In order to be a member of the church, that's what you do.
I couldn't have told you what Jesus died for to save my life at that point. Yeah. So, yeah, I couldn't have explained salvation to you if my life depended on it. So that kind of tells you what that was all about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what a lot of Christians that follow me, when they ask questions, they have no idea because, see, a lot of people, they think the Amish are the most religious, the right with the Lord, and they would actually read them, but they don't necessarily read the salvation part, especially the old order style. I know there's some that do, but that's what people were mostly amazed about the Christians. They were like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought they were the saved people. I thought they read all of the Bible and kept it real closely, but they don't keep the Bible as closely as what Christians out here would.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's, I always thought up until probably 9 years ago. It was several years after I left the Amish. I still thought that, going to heaven was maybe a 50-50 chance if you're a good person your whole life. It was kind of like a lottery type deal is what I thought it was. And if you manage to outweigh your bad deeds with good deeds, you got a shot at it. And if not, you're screwed. So it was, and that was the other thing. I don't know. I always thought differently, and I think part of it was because I read a lot as a kid. From the time I learned to read, every night I would have my nose in a book, and Sunday afternoons, I would be reading always. And we had the library right up the road, and we had actually worked for the Terrell Farms there. And it was his wife, Nancy Terrell, was the librarian there. And she knew us. We had actually done a lot of work on their farm, building and, putting up barns and stuff like that. So she would let me come in and get books. And so I read a lot. And Dad didn't like it, and he caught me a couple of times. But I got good at sneaking books in the house and taking them back to the library. And I don't know. I guess I just always thought differently, and I just the one good thing about it was I was very honest about my chances of getting to heaven because I understood enough that I knew that this is never going to work out. I'm going to wind up in hell going down this road, and I'm here in the Amish trying to be good sometimes. But it never works out long term, and this is, if I'm going to hell, I finally decided I'm just going to leave the Amish and have some fun first. So that was my theory when I left.
Yeah, that's usually the number one. People actually, when you're taught as a young child that you're not going to please God if you left their religion, that's kind of hard to break. I know I had a hard time breaking. I was like, well, why would I even read the Bible after I left? I'm like, why would I attempt to read and be religious or go to church because, well, I'm not Amish, so why bother? Because that is really kind of brainwashed into our brain cells that that's the way it has to be in order to please God. But wouldn't you agree with me that they make God out to be like a really angry God? They make God sound like it's so hard to please him.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way I looked at him. Actually, it was based on that mindset is what actually got my attention. I was in an accident. There was someone else involved in it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it was an accident where we should have been, we could have very easily had our necks broken. I mean, we could have died, and we didn't. We walked away without hardly a scratch. And up until that point, I always thought, well, I'm living this sinful life. I left the Amish, I left my family, I'm doing everything I'm probably not supposed to do. Sooner or later, God is going to get even with me. It's just how it works. That's how I always thought it worked. And it was actually after that accident, we were pretty intoxicated when the accident happened. And afterwards, we were no longer intoxicated. That'll scare you straight pretty fast. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I just thought this to myself. I remember, realizing I wasn't hurt. I remember thinking, I wonder why God didn't take this opportunity to get even with me. I mean, he could have broken my neck. He could have broken my leg. I mean, could have hurt me somehow. And I heard this very, I don't think it was audible. It was more clear than hearing something audibly. But in my soul, I heard this voice that said, because I am not who you think I am.
Wow.
So I, so I had to deal with that going through my head over and over and over again over the next several months, and trying to figure out what that was supposed to mean. And through that process, over the next year, I got involved with a church who homemade food is how they lured me in. But I hadn't had much homemade food at that point in years, so. But I got to hear the salvation message, and it was at that point that I started realizing what I heard, why I heard that, because I started realizing that God actually is on my side. He actually wants me to make something of my life. He's not against me. He's for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was about the time that there was a 180 involved in my life, or a 360.
I love how God things that happen. I love tests like that because when you've been brainwashed, when we've been brainwashed to the point of we think we can't please God, they make it the Amish make him sound like it's so hard to please God, and he's an angry God. So therefore, God intervenes and allows things to happen like that. So thanks for sharing that, because sometimes God just has to do things and show us who he really is. That
Yeah,
he's he's a gracious, forgiving God, and it's not what the Amish and especially the older Amish where we come from. It seemed like it was impossible to please him. So
right.
it was about the rules and following and pleasing the Ordnung and the rules to then please God that way. And that's
Right.
why I thought that, if I get, because I always snug around radios and little cameras and stuff like that. And as I got a little older, I got to where I would actually do it on purpose, and I would try to break the rules on purpose. Where I just didn't care anymore. Would you say?
Well, it was kind of a rush after a while. It was a thrill. Uh, in a life where everything was supposed to be all planned out, from your haircut to the color of your shoes and how you did life, everything was planned out for you. You were supposed to follow the rules, do everything, and then going and doing something that blatantly that you're not supposed to do, and then try to sneak it behind the elders and the parents' back and get away with it. That was actually quite a thrill at first, anyway.
Right.
So, and especially if from my point of view, I had a feeling that with my life and the way I was living my life, it probably wasn't going to work out for the best at the end anyway. And so there was just less and less motivation over time to try and do what was right. Until I got to the point where I just didn't care anymore. So I just kind of, just pulled out all the stops. Yeah, I did the same thing. I drove vehicles. I had a radio. I had a CD player. That was the one thing where the long hair worked in my favor, and the collars, you had to have your collar closed.
Yeah.
Especially in the winter. I had one of those little round battery powered CD players that's about that thick.
Yeah.
And my neighbor, Larry Dickinson, I don't know if you knew him or not, but he was kind of like my grandpa. He had horses and he got hay every year. And so me and my brothers would go help him bale hay, stack hay in the barn, clean stalls for him. As I got older, I rode a couple of his young horses for him that needed some kinks worked out of him. He was older, so he didn't want to get bucked off, so he put me on him. So, and they were mostly barrel horses, and so he got into some raunchy horses sometimes. But over the years, we kind of developed a relationship where he was kind of like my grandpa, you know. If I had problems at home, I was in trouble, and there was nobody to talk to about it, really. So I'd go over to Larry's, and we'd sit down in the living room and watch Clint Eastwood and John Wayne movies on his TV and talk about stuff. I could bounce stuff off of him and be completely honest with him about things. And the thing was, he stuck up for me. Maybe he shouldn't have some of the things I was doing. But it was a new experience for me, for someone, especially an adult, an older person, to actually, go, well, the things you're going through is you're being a normal teenager. That's what most teenagers go through. And, everybody else in my life was condemning me and damning me every time I turned around.
Yeah.
So Larry was very much like my grandpa. Probably the closest thing I ever had to a grandpa. I mean, I had one Amish grandpa, and he didn't like me that much because he was very much a stickler for the rules too. And it didn't take him too long to figure out I was on the other side of things. So, and then my other grandpa left the Amish before I was born. And I never met him until I think 4 or 5 years after I left the Amish before I ever met him.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about your grandpa that left the Amish. And I guess that's one thing that, immediately everything's bad about it. He's going to hell. He's not going to make it. That's the things I heard about your grandpa. So you were actually able to end a relationship with him and talk to him after you left?
Yeah, I talked to him face to face twice before he died. And I talked to him he had a cell phone, so I talked to him quite a bit on the phone. So, I got to know him somewhat before he died. So I felt good about that because I had never seen, I'd seen a picture of him one time. The Ohio Farmer magazine way back in the day published a picture of him when he was corn husking and he won. So I saw that picture of him one time. And that was the only time I'd ever seen him up until that point. We drove to Wisconsin and met him there.
But would you say when you were growing up, when your grandpa's name came up and they talked about him, were you taught that, hey, he left the Amish, he's condemned, that condemning kind of speech?
Oh yeah. Well, and it was the same way with when you and some of the other guys that left when I would have been, around 10 to into my early teens. I remember Levi Bontrager. I remember some of those guys leaving the Amish, and it was always a really big deal. Like, these people they're totally lost. And you would hear sermons about it, or they would preach about how they're going to hell, and they'd preach about how, examples of other people that left the Amish and they got in a car wreck and it killed them, and this was God's way of showing them, and, on and on and on. It was always the idea that God will get even. God will get you at the end of the day. And that was always whether that was the outright message or whether it was the undertone of the message, that was always the tone.
Yeah.
Was at the end of the day, God will get even with you.
Yeah.
So, which is really the basis of their religion is fear. Creating that fear of first leaving the Amish, and then they'll, obviously the teaching is that you have to follow the rules of the church because the church is of God. And if you don't follow the rules of the church, you're going to hell. God's going to get you. Yeah. So that was the whole premise of the whole thing. They use that fear of manipulation, and then the church can just come up with any rule they want and tell you got to follow it. And then if you don't, then God's going to get you. So you got to follow the rule.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because there's some of them that after they left, they actually remembered in the year 1998 when I left the Amish, and they remembered actually like a sermon about what's going to happen to Eli Yoder. God's going to take him out. He won't survive out there. And then they would share other stories of what they might have heard of an accident happening to someone that left. And they will always that accident as that's God. God did that to that person that left because, he was angry that they left the Amish religion, and he'll kill you. He'll take you out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Susan Phipps on here, she says, what part of Kenton community did you grow up? You were over closer to Ridgeway and Mount Victory area, right?
We lived on 273. If she knows where Hale Cemetery is on 273, it's about a mile and a half straight west of Mount Victory. We lived right on the west side of Hale Cemetery. Actually, I broke my right arm in Hale Cemetery. I had a horse run away with me, and he ran right into the fence at the end of the field there. And I was riding him. It was a young Appaloosa. It was the first time I ever rode him. And I was thinking because it was a plowed field, if he tried to run off, it wouldn't work. Well, he only hit the high spots all the way to the fence. And he hit the fence, and I went head over heels over the top of the fence, and my arm clipped the top of a metal post on the way in. And so I actually ended up walking down to the road and walking up to the house, carrying my arm on the way back to the house. That we grew up right on the west side of that cemetery. One of my cousins lives there now.
Oh, okay.
But that was the farm that my grandma and grandpa bought when they moved there from Indiana. And then my dad took over the farm when he got married.
Oh, okay. You married an ex-Amish too, didn't you?
Yeah. Yep.
You from the same community, or where'd you find her at?
No, she grew up in Marlette, Michigan, and then I met her down in Virginia. They moved to an Amish community in Virginia, and then they left. Her and her mother and her brother left the Amish down there, I think. Yeah. And they lived there, and I met her on Facebook is how I met her.
That's awesome how God leads us all together, and he brings the right one in the right place at the right time. And that's there. So that's awesome. Your dad. I always like asking people this because I have such a hard time with my family visiting them after I left. Having rules in place, can't drive my vehicle in there. I can't, I have to have Amish clothes on. Now, after you left, were you able to just freely go in and visit your family or no?
No, I left on really bad terms. Honestly, I didn't, up until a day or two before I actually left, did I ever think that, maybe I'm just going to leave the Amish completely. Up until that point, I was still so focused on, I guess you could say earthly things, the things that you can have and can't have. Mm-hmm. I always envied the Bell Center Amish. Yeah. And I always dreamed of when I turned 21, I'm going to move to a New Order Amish community like that. And my plan was I was going to move to more and more and more liberal Amish communities until I won't get excommunicated for moving to a New Order Amish community.
I love that.
That was my plan, kind of what I thought in my head I was going to do. And I was training horses outside of the farm. People were bringing horses, and I had anywhere from 5 to 10 horses there usually. And we had 2 different barns. And so on Saturdays, clients would come out and I would show them how, the progress of their horse. I would always try and get them to ride their horse before they took it home, because usually they were young horses, and if they were only used to me riding, so I'd try and get them acquainted with their horse and whatnot before they took it home. Well, Saturdays was a big day for me because people would come out, and so I would show them how far I'd gotten with their horse and what their horse was doing and all that good stuff. And I had been excommunicated, I think, for the second time at that point. Yeah, the second time. And, well, that's a little backstory to that, because they had told me that they wanted me to agree to be excommunicated. And I said, no. And finally, they said, well, if you agree to it, we'll just do this for 2 weeks and you can be a member again. And finally, I said, whatever, if that'll make you happy, then yeah, let's go for it. 2 weeks it is. And so the next Sunday, they excommunicated me. And 2 weeks later, on a Saturday night, here they come. The old story, clip-clopping down the road after dark with a buggy full of preachers. And they roll up, and me and my dad, we both walk out there, and they kind of, start talking about the weather and whatnot. And so finally, Glick, him, Milo Glick, he goes, well, how do you feel about this? Do you feel like you're ready to join the church again? And I just said, yeah, I'm good. I'm ready. And the funny thing is, for those 2 weeks, I had actually gone out of my way. I had left my cell phone over at Larry's barn. I had the CD players, everything. I had nothing on the farm, and I wasn't using any of it. And I was trying my best to follow all the rules and do what I was supposed to do. And and I said, yeah, I'm ready. And so there was an awkward pause, and the clearing the throat and shuffling the feet. And he goes, well, they think I should probably do another 2 weeks. They don't think I'm ready. And I said, well, why not? What did I do? Oh, well, they don't know that I did anything. I said, then what's the problem? Well, they just don't feel that I'm ready. They just don't think I'm ready. So I said, was this planned? You told me 2 weeks, and now you're going back on that. And that created more stammering and stuttering, and I just turned around and walked away. I'd never talked to him since.
Awesome.
And it was at that point it clicked. I was like, these people they straight up lied to me, and they expect me to trust them and be part of their church. At that point, I had zero interest, never going to their church again, and I never did. So this was about a week later, I think, maybe 2 weeks later. I don't remember. Something like it wasn't long afterwards. And and the other thing was, because I was excommunicated, well, I was making, anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 a month off these horses per horse. And I was giving my dad all the money, except for a couple bucks here and there. I'd keep some money. Nothing major. And when I was excommunicated, a lot of them would pay cash. And I walk in, and I remember I walked in the house and I went to hand my dad the money. and they'd given a down payment. This was like, I think like $900 or something. And I went to hand him the money, and he goes, no. He said, lay it on the table over there. And because he's not allowed to take anything from my hand. And I said, no. You mean to tell me I'm supposed to give you all my money, but I'm not? You're too good to take it out of my hand. He kind of raised his voice and told me, well, about how I know how it is, and on and on and on. So finally, I'm like, okay, and laid the money on the table and walked out. And so I don't know. I think that was on a Friday, and then Saturday, when I had 3 customers there, they had and at that point, I think I only had 6 horses there, and these 3 customers owned all of them. And he walks in there and he tells them, hey, you got to get your horses and you got to leave. Take your horses and get out of here. And was just flat rude to him. He didn't give him an explanation or nothing. And which he had the right to do it. It was his barn, his land. But how he thought that was going to help the situation, I have no idea to this point. But actually, hang on. I'm going to make a note here. I got a story I got to tell you that I don't want to forget. But anyway, so they did. Well, the one guy didn't have his trailer there. 2 of them had their trailers parked there. And so they left with their horses. And then the other guy was going to come back like on Monday or something and get his horse. And so after they left, my dad had a pallet shop and he was up there making pallets. And so I walk up there and I walk in there and I asked him what he thinks he's doing, and which my tone didn't help anything either. And at that point, we were already getting along like a cat and a dog anyway. And so it didn't take long for that to turn into a screaming match, and it carried out into the barn. I walked down. I finally said, screw you, whatever. I don't remember what I said. I walked down to the other end of the barn, and he follows me. And by that time, my mom had heard us yelling at each other, and she came out of the house and came out to the barn. And so she is standing there, literally crying and telling both of us to stop yelling at each other. And he's telling me how I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm telling him I'm not going to do this, and he can take all of it and shove it where the sun don't shine. And it just, finally, I just turned around and walked. I walked across a 30-acre field into the woods, walked through the woods over to Larry's house, got all my stuff. And I actually had to set a pair of jeans and a T-shirt over there too. And I got all my stuff, and I called one of my clients that had actually told me they had a big barn down in Plain City. And they had told me if I ever, and that was the weird thing. That was like a prophecy. Now, a year before, they had a horse there, and they told me if I ever want to leave or I ever want to come to their barn, they got plenty of extra stalls I can work out of their barn. And I remembered that, and I had their phone number, so I called him. I said, hey, Dennis, you remember me? And I said, I need a ride and a place to stay. And so I went back on the following Sunday when I knew they were going to be in church, and got my saddles and a whole bunch of my tack and went up in my room and got a lot of my stuff. And actually, I had two horses that my dad had given to me. He had told me those are my horses. The one of them I raised the horse all on my own. I found a stud I wanted to breed to this mare, and I wanted a certain colt, so I got this horse. And there was another one that we had rescued, actually, from a barn where they were malnourished and whatnot. And the guy was selling like the whole lot for next to nothing. So I got my friend to pick up those horses with his trailer too. And of course, after that, my dad, of course, went and started the rumor and said, he stole 2 horses. Was what he was telling everybody. which, I expected as much, but I was like, hey, you told me they were my horses. I put all the work in. I made him thousands of dollars training horses and gave him all the money. And I don't feel bad at all for taking the horses to this day. If I had it to do over again, I'd do it again, because they were mine. But anyway, I forget where I was going with the story, but long story short, I ended up staying down there in Marysville, Plain City area. And my dad would call. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So my dad would call me. He got my phone number, and he would call me, and he would tell me that, basically tell me to come back home now or else. And I would say no. It would turn into a big argument on the phone, and usually end yelling at each other on the phone. This went on for a couple of years. Well, when I was born again, well, here's something he would always say to me. He'd tell me I'm going to hell. And I had embraced that at that point, so that wasn't any big news to me. So I'd just tell him, just because I knew it would make him mad, I'd tell him, well, you know what, I'll see you there. And that would make him really, really angry when I'd say stuff like that. And so after I was born again, I went back to the farm. I just stopped in one night when I knew they would be milking, they'd be doing chores. And I stopped in, and the first thing I told him is, I said, the last couple of years we've said a lot of bad things, especially me. And I said, I apologize for what I'd said and what I'd done to him. And I asked for his forgiveness, and he said, I would like to forgive you, but you haven't come back to the Amish, so I can't. And then I started telling him a little bit about the accident I had, and what happened, and that I was born again. And that was the second time in my life I ever saw my dad cry. He started crying, and I thought, well, he's happy that my life has changed. And after a little bit, I asked him, I said, what are you crying about? And he goes, well, said, once these ex-Amish people say that they've been born again, they never come back.
Because we got Jesus. We don't need it anymore.
And at the time, I didn't. It kind of confused me. I didn't realize exactly why he was saying that. And then, of course, then he went into the whole spiel how I got a false religion, yada yada yada, all the stuff that they teach, when you're Amish. And so it was later, when I was on my way back to Marysville, I was driving down the road, and all of a sudden I realized, now I know why he said they never come back. Because first of all, the statement is a condemnation of him. He just basically admitted, once you find Jesus, you never want to go back to the Amish. Why would you ever want to go back to the bondage? Is what he was telling me, and without realizing what he actually said.
Yeah.
But that was a pretty big revelation. And from that point, I kind of had a different attitude, a lot different attitude toward. I tried my best to be friends with him. I tried to be nice to him, be respectful. And I even took my wife out there to meet him before we got married. I took her out there and introduced her, and they just, acted as if she didn't exist. Wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't hardly even look at her. And so it was just that off and on thing over the next several years. But then they started attacking Martha and the kids, and started saying things that weren't very nice. And my mother would always write letters. She would rather I would have died as an infant than to grow up and leave the Amish. She's told me that 100 times. And so, it was off and on up until about 3 years ago, two and a half years ago, when our daughter was born. And I found out my dad had a phone. One of the things I got excommunicated for, he actually has now. And which it's a phone shack, so it's not mobile, it's out in a shack across the road. But still, I called and left a message on his phone. I got his phone number from his neighbor that's not Amish. And I called him and I told him that we had a daughter, and I told him about the boys when they were born. And he calls me back a couple days later one day and just kind of calls and didn't. I could sense there was something had been brewing. And so I kind of asked him about his life a little bit, how things are going, and he just didn't have much to say. And I told him, well, hey, you got a new granddaughter, and I told him her name, and then he cut me off and just starts just going. I mean, he went berserk. Yeah, he said some things about her and the rest of the kids and me and Martha that I wouldn't repeat, and basically he threatened the whole family. And at that point, after that, I wouldn't take my family anywhere near them. And if they came anywhere near my house, I'd have them arrested.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him because of the grudge that I know he holds and the things he's willing to say. So at this point, I have no relationship with him whatsoever. I won't, they wrote a couple of nasty letters, and I just return to sender and send them back to them and told them I don't want anything to hear from them if they don't have nothing nice to say. I haven't heard from them in almost 3 years, so I guess they have nothing nice to say. I met them at my uncle's funeral, and they were cordial. There was 1,000 people around. They didn't have my dad didn't hardly have anything to say, but so yeah, it's but back to the story I wanted to talk about earlier. Around the time I first started becoming a little bit more rebellious, and this would have been probably 6 months or more after I was baptized. They decided that the best solution is to take me to a counselor. I got to go to a counselor because I'm rebellious. And some people probably know where I'm talking about. I don't. Is it called Harmony Haven? It's up in Everett, Michigan.
Everett, Michigan, yeah.
So Bill Buxton might see this, but he was the driver. He came and picked us up that morning, and we drove up to Harmony Haven, all the way up in Everett, Michigan. And so what it was, my dad talked about it to me the night before, I think. It wasn't very far before we were leaving that he said something. And I said, well, I'm not going. I don't need counseling. What do I need counseling for? Well, they feel I need it. I said, well, I'm not going. And so finally he said, okay, well, he said, let's just go visit for the day. And then, we can make up our mind then. But finally I said, okay, we can go for a day. And we drove up there, walk in there, and these guys do a tour of the place. And there's all these guys there, some of them around my age, some older guys, working in this furniture shop in there. They're showing me the living quarters, the kitchen, and on and on. And they go out for a 1 hour once a day, go on a group walk and whatnot. And, a little bit later, I was thinking, man, I got to get out of here. This is like a prison in here. And I never have any alone time at all. And they were just going on and on. So they wanted to do an interview with me. So they took me in this little conference room, and they I don't know why they decided to bring this up, but I never liked the bishop, and I didn't make any secret of it. But you know who he was,
Yeah.
our bishop over there. And I just didn't like him. I mean, I couldn't stand the guy. He didn't like me. And so one of the first things they bring up, so there's these four guys, these big, got to imagine these big, burly, bearded guys sitting on one side of the table, and I'm sitting on the other side. and, so one of the first things they bring up is the fact that I don't like the bishop and what my problem is. And I said, well, I just don't like him. I think he's an a-hole, is what I said. I said it right to their face, and they just, I don't think they expected that answer. They expected some, logical reason. And I was just up front, and I said, I don't like him, plain and simple. And so they kind of looked at each other and shuffled their feet under the table and kind of changed the subject and started talking about me not following the rules of the church. And conversation didn't last very long because I just didn't have much to say. And what I did, I just flat out just said, just like the bishop, I just said I don't like him. And then I thought the rules don't make any sense, so why should I follow them? And so they were done with me pretty quick. And I went out and sat in the van with Bill, and they did an interview with my mom and dad. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation. But they, about an hour later, they come out, and Dad just walks to the back of the van and starts pulling a suitcase out. And I'm just sitting there kind of watching. And he goes, well, you're staying here for a while. I said, what? I said, why? Well, you need to stay here. I said, no, I'm not staying here. And then he kind of raised his voice and said, you're staying here. And I said, no, I'm not staying here. I said, you can leave me here if you want to, but I'm not staying here. I will leave. And he just stood there and looked at me kind of in disbelief. I don't think he could believe that I just said that. And he stood there and looked at me for a little bit, turned around, put the suitcase back in the van, and him and Mom climbed in, and we left.
Wow.
But they were going to put me in that counseling place simply because I didn't want to follow all the rules of the church.
It really, if you remember when I had Ruben Stutzman on, that's what they were doing to him. They sent him to two different counseling places, try to make him rethink what he's doing, kind of reprogram you to think the opposite way.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, it had nowhere with you. You wasn't going to have it.
No, I was. Well, the thing that's always funny, that's kind of ironic about the whole thing is, me and my dad think very differently, but we were very much alike. And once we made up our mind and we were stubborn enough to do whatever it took to do what we decided to do. And so the two was just constant. After I got through my mid-teens, it was constant headbutting the whole way through. So, yeah, that's kind of how that went. But,
that's usually what they do. They try to reprogram you in those facilities, Amish operated, Amish owned, and they want you to think their way. You got to follow the rules. If you don't follow their rules, there must be something wrong with you. You need counseling. And yet you're not even the problem. The religious rules and the Ordnung is the problem.
I mean, I'm not afraid to say and willing to admit that had I been anybody else's child, I would have probably been a problem too. I was a high-strung, hyperactive kid my whole life. I still am to a certain point, but I've always been a high-energy, just I got to go do something. I'm always doing something. And that's what got me in so much trouble. I mean, you're on the farm, you're either working or there's nothing to do. And my escape was through books. I would read, and that would put me in a whole nother world. So to me, that was like, my escape from reality for a short period of time.
Yeah.
But it also educated me in ways that I and them would have never anticipated because I read so much. And so my dad was probably right when he said, I I read too much. Because it wasn't like I was reading the Bible either. I was reading Louis L'Amour books and romance novels and everything in between. And outside of that, I was reading everything. But yeah, it was something. I was also we had talked a little bit about dating. Something that always blew my mind after I left. I never heard of this before I left the Amish, but I heard about this bed courtship and whatnot that some of the communities did, and that always blew my mind. I thought what happened in Kenton was out pretty far out there. So the first date I ever had with this girl. So what happened is her brother took her home. Like on a first date, it was very secretive, and so I met them at the house. Actually, I rolled in probably 10 minutes after they were there. And I roll up behind the barn and tie up my horse. No, actually, that time I unhitched my horse and put him in the barn so nobody drive by and see my horse standing there. And so I start walking towards the house, and she comes out of the house and meets me. And we kind of, said hi and talked a little bit. And she said, well, follow me. And I followed her, and we go up to her room. And, I got to leave my coat and my hat in her room. And then we go downstairs. And at this point, I wasn't sure what to expect. I'd heard stories, but I wasn't sure. And I knew she'd had dates before. And so I just figured, well, follow her lead. We go downstairs, and I'm not kidding you. There was a light on, and she blew out the light, and it was just a kerosene lamp. And there's a rocking chair that's sitting maybe, 10, 12 feet from her mom and dad's bedroom door. And there's a rocking chair there, and she just kind of takes me by the hand and leads me over there and told me to sit there, and she just plops right on my lap. And we sat there in the dark talking for a couple of hours. And then that was it. That was the end of the date. And I went home, I think, like 11:30 or something. I went home. I think we were supposed to be home by 1 a.m, I think is what the rule was.
Yeah, that was so.
But looking back, at the time, I thought it was bizarre. And then I kind of got used to the idea.
Yeah.
And now that I'm outside of that culture, it still blows my mind that that happens. I can't even wrap my head around, thinking that's the great way to have a date. Sitting there whispering in the dark. And, yeah. And that's pretty much how I dated her for probably 6 months, something like that. That's pretty much how the whole thing went. Now, sometimes once we'd been dating for a while, sometimes we would, they had a front porch swing. We leave the door open and because you kind of had to be within a certain distance of mom and dad's bedroom is kind of what the idea was. That way, if any funny business started, I don't know if dad was hunched behind the bedroom door or not listening. I don't know what. For all I know, I was pretty blind in the dark. I was always night blind. He could have been hiding in the corner out in the living room listening to the whole thing for all I know. I don't know.
So that probably blows your mind when some of the interviews I've done on here where the Swartzen troopers would say how they did bundling. They literally got in bed together and they did like this bundling thing. And that always blew my mind because I thought, why have a date where you get together in bed? I mean, you thought the rocking chair was bizarre. I mean,
right.
Some of the Amish communities are getting in bed with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it is totally bizarre. And some of my friends that are going to hear this video are going to, you talk about some of that stuff now and listen to it. It sounds like it sounds made up, like out of a novel. It really sounds completely made up, but it is 100% real. They do that stuff.
It's the most bizarre stuff. Like Daniel Yoder says, I can write a book on Amish dating rules. I mean, it does sound bizarre, some of the stuff that we experienced in the Amish, and people just are you going to write a book, Andrew?
I am in the process of writing one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I recently found a publisher and editor that's going to help me with it, but it's just going to be kind of like a biography, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
that we went through and experienced. I mean, I think all of us that left could write a book that's pretty thick.
yeah, I'm sure we could.
Yeah. So you're saved now, and you and your family are out in Colorado, and you go to church, and it's about the real deal now. You follow Jesus Christ because He's the only way to heaven, and you block out all that ordinance and man-made religion, right?
That's right.
Praise God.
Yeah. We got a really good church family here that we go to church with that we really get a lot out of, and it's been a journey, that's for sure. But looking back, like I said, mentioned earlier, probably the best thing, at the time when I left the Amish, I thought that it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me. But now looking back, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because if they hadn't taught, I don't know what my mindset would have been if they hadn't taught me that that my works are what is strictly dependent on me going to heaven. Because it was actually that fact that caused me to give up. And it was the fact that I gave up is what eventually led me back to God. And if that hadn't happened, I don't know what my mindset would have been. So that was a blessing in disguise, actually, that they taught me that, because it changed a lot of things for my mindset, really.
Yeah. Even some of those things that happened is actually a blessing that led us on our journey, that we ended up this way, getting saved. God works that way. He actually uses those bad things for his own glory, for good. Turns bad things good. But sometimes we don't do that until later on in life. And then we look back and we're like, oh, I'm actually now glad. Even though then it seemed horrible, now we look back like, wow, thank you, Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Well, hey, thanks very much for hopping on here with me and sharing all of that. I'm sure you got plans for the day.